Hey, everybody, welcome to WP Roundtable, episode 119. I'm happy to be here with you today. My name is Kyle Maurer. I'm coming up here from Jackson, Michigan, selling plugins and WordPress services, and very excited to have a special guest, Alex Beaudin, on the show today, a fellow friend from the Mitten over in Ann Arbor at a company called Build Create. You might recognize the name of the company because we had another member of the company on the show pretty close to a year ago by now. I believe it was last November. We had Ian Wilson on the show to talk about what Build Create does. And so Alex is another member of the team, and we're excited to have him with us. How you doing tonight, Alex?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on the show. You and I met earlier this summer for the first time at WordCamp Chicago. It was a pleasant event, and it was good to see and meet other members of the Build Create team.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun there actually.
Yeah, I've met Ian quite a few times, but was starting to wonder about whether there really was much of a team behind this guy because I never got to see him out in public. Ian seems to come out more than everybody else. Uh, but
Hmm.
it was nice to meet you guys, and I'm going to see you this weekend as well at another WordCamp locally.
That's right.
So, before we learn all about Alex, what he's done, and what he works on now, and what he wants to work on in the future, we're going to talk about our quick picks of the week real fast. So, this is just a part of the show where we share something new and interesting that we discovered just recently that we think people should maybe take a look at. For myself, I am pretty interested in some of the things that are being proposed for WordPress core lately. So, we just finished up a WordPress core release cycle. I say we, I just watch, haven't been too actively involved in many release cycles, but I watch very closely as it's a big part of my job, what happens with this software. And I'm fascinated by the discussions that go on by all these uh, brilliant people volunteering so much of their time to move the software forward. So just recently, John Blackburn, who was the release lead for, I believe it was WordPress 4.1, made a proposal for a notifications API in WordPress. And I shared that with the rest of my team, the other developers that work for me, and we had a great discussion about it. And it's pretty exciting. It would have a pretty significant impact on some of the projects that we work on, some of the plugins that we maintain. And it's pretty cool. So if you go to make.wordpress.org /core, there's some interesting recent posts, and the notifications API is one that I am particularly excited about. Granted, there's a couple others that are really neat. So I recommend you just take a look at them if you're not following the core blog. Alex, do you have anything interesting to share?
Yeah, actually, I had just come back from Traverse City over the weekend. We were doing a mini archaeological dig, and while we were up there, we ate some great food and had some great beer. Stopped in at North Peak, which people from around the area here know of Grizzly Peak. They're owned by the same company, but I had a great cask ale, a nice cherry stout that really set off what it was like to be up in Traverse City in the fall.
That's awesome. I love it. I love it. Some tasty new brews from up north. I just got a few up northern brews yesterday. My mom brought me some down from Marquette, from Black Rocks, and from the other one that's up there, Ordock, I think. So yeah, local Michigan craft brew is among my chief passions. Good
Oh yeah,
choice.
yeah. We have some of the best beer in the country in this state, so
I
it's
absolutely agree. It's actually at this point quite unusual for me to drink any beers that aren't from Michigan. It's just my go-to at all times.
oh for sure.
We'll definitely be trying some together this weekend, and
Of
that's
course.
that's going to be a topic that we will discuss soon because I'm interested in getting maybe a preview about your session because we're doing a WordCamp presentation this coming Saturday. Excited about it. But before that, let's talk a little bit about you, Alex. Let's dive into your background first. So, if you don't mind, I want to understand where you come from. And in particular, if you could take us back to before your career really got on track, before you started doing stuff on the web and anthropology and user experience stuff, before you really had any kind of a career going, back when you were young, you said, I'm Alex Beaudin and I'm going to conquer the world. I'm going to go out and this is what I'm going to do. What was that like?
Well, depending depending on how early you want to go, it used to be, I'm Alex Beaudin and I want to be a race car driver. My dad drag raced when I was a kid, and so I spent a lot of time with him at the track on weekends, all summer long, and that's just what I grew up loving. And somehow I ended up going to college and majored in anthropology, which they have nothing to do with one another, really. But I stuck with it, and actually, straight from undergrad, I went for my master's, and I my master's was in business anthropology, so it was kind of like getting closer to putting them together. Um, and then once, like while I was in school, I ended up randomly hooking up with these guys here at Build Create. They just needed somebody part time to help out, do content work, just content entry, stuff like that. And I slowly but surely finally finished my degree and came on full time as basically just like content strategy, project management, and then I kind of forced my way into the design and development process. Helping argue with the designer and the developer about what things should look like, how they should work, and just kind of like forcing my way into like the user experience role here, because my entire background is in trying to understand human behavior, and so it just seemed like a perfect fit of just taking like what I was trained to do and applying it to this new career that I kind of like fell into.
It's pretty fascinating. And there's some stuff that I really want to dive into there, But first, was there any other work that you did, any past experience prior to Build Create? You said you joined them while you're still in school. What else did you do professionally?
Um, well, I used to, like, my dad owns a shop where they do a lot of prototype work, and they used to do like legal work for one of the big three. And part of my job was essentially talking with lawyers and engineers and figuring out what they wanted and then giving it to them. So kind of what I guess kind of like my precursor to anthropology was just figuring out how to translate between different types of people, which now I understand, they're basically different cultures. Engineering has its own culture, law has its own culture, and just kind of trying to figure out like what the engineer is telling me, what the lawyer needs to show in the courtroom, and then how to actually make it work in everyday life. So that's kind of how I got into anthropology, and that was basically what I did from the time I was about 12 all the way until grad school.
And it appears that I'm back after some brief technical difficulties. I do apologize for the problem. I believe Alex will be joining me again shortly. And in the meantime, I want to just let everybody know that if you haven't gotten your ticket to WordCamp Ann Arbor for this weekend, you really need to get on it. We've got just a small number remaining. They're going fast. And it looks like Alex is back. Alex?
Not sure what happened there.
Hey, you know what's funny? Your audio is even better than it was before.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, great.
Perfect.
So I'm not sure exactly where we lost you, but you were talking just a little bit about your shop that you worked at with your father.
Yeah, yeah. I basically ended up finding myself in the role of having to translate between lawyers and engineers and deciding what was possible in real life to do, and it just kind of ended with I basically just worked there in that capacity all the way until I got to grad school, and then that became my full-time job. Um, but yeah, it was definitely an interesting experience, kind of learning before I knew what anthropology even was, how to interact with just different types of people, and then try and bring their two different viewpoints together.
All right. So I want to talk a little bit about what you do professionally and how your anthropology background impacts your work and with the perspective that you bring to your work. But first, let's just kind of do a quick refresh on what Build Create actually is. What is this company? Who do you serve? What's this business all about?
Sure. Yeah, Build Create. We're just a small web development firm. We generally uh, we specialize more or less these days in developing complex systems for people to use and to help them build their businesses. Um, so like we've built a handful of just completely weird systems in WordPress that don't really, they're not really websites so much as just new tools. But one of the main things that we like to do though is our goal is to make sure that not only is the client happy, but that the user can actually, use the product. It should be kind of a seamless process. You should never have to ask the question of how do I do the one thing I'm trying to do? And that's part of what I like to do here is just figure out what the user is supposed to be doing and how to make it the most seamless process possible.
Fascinating. Can you walk us through, maybe some examples of like the kinds of projects that you're taking on and some of the specific maybe challenges, just examples, common challenges that customers are facing, and you're trying to solve these problems. Just get into the nitty gritty just a little bit so we can understand
Yeah,
day-to-day projects.
yeah, sure. Day to day is like, because I primarily am doing project management, there's a lot of just email back and forth. And that, unfortunately, as far as web development and design goes, that most of what we do around here is just figuring out what's supposed to be happening. And specifically, one of the more interesting projects that we've worked on recently, we had to build a system that had a bunch of individual sites, and we used the multi-site setup for WordPress. And essentially what it does is it talks to a database of articles, and the users of our client, they can go in and basically spin up a new website, choose from a database of articles what they want to show on their websites, and then essentially publish a brand new site without ever having to do anything more than click, drag, and hit save.
Wow.
Um, yeah,
That sounds
that
pretty
was
powerful.
probably that was one of the most impressive things we've done probably in this past year, and we're still continuing to work on that product and make it better and create new functionality for it. So it's just getting bigger and better and more customizable as every week goes by. But as far as like common challenges that like we face on a daily basis, it's trying to save the client from themselves, because every client seems to have this concept of what the product should be rather than what the product needs to be. So one of the things we've been fighting with recently is we were tasked with designing a like like an appointment scheduling and like product and service offering selection tool that essentially creates a quote or an estimate that gets shipped off to the company, and then the company schedules the appointment and sends out technicians to service the client's home. We've done multiple iterations of live site at this point, kind of figuring out how best to do it, and then arguing with the client a few times a week about what it should be doing, how it should be doing it. And their essential response is, well, no, but I want it this way. And so it's kind of like our largest struggle is just saving the client from themselves.
It's not an unusual problem, something that is faced by a lot of agencies and freelancers in our position. I do similar work to what you do myself, and I don't know what the secret to solving this problem is. I've probably gotten better at it over years, but I'm definitely curious to get your insight, just for those curious on improving this part of their client interactions. What tactics have you learned that prove to be even somewhat effective for helping the client through this process, getting them to come to terms with the suggestions that you're making, getting them to see your side, getting them to think critically about what actually is needed versus what they want to satisfy their own desires? What strategies have worked for you?
Actually, one of the most useful tools is just being or trying to be charismatic, just helping to convince them that you're right without actually having to give them any sort of like facts or figures, because I've learned over the last few years that they don't necessarily care about why something is factually better or worse, but they just want to feel good about the decision they're making. So if you can get them to trust you and just kind of feel good about the decision, regardless of whether or not you have facts to back it up, that definitely helps. Although I do like to be able to present the fact, like, well, here's the data on why you shouldn't be, like why you don't necessarily need to reduce the number of clicks in your system. It's like, yes, there are more clicks, but this forces the user to go through steps in order to complete a task. And if this sounds kind of specific, it's because that's what I've been working on for the last 3 weeks, is trying to work with the client to say, like, well, no, you don't need to reduce the number of clicks because you've just increased the clicks because people are now searching all over the site trying to figure out what's going on.
Right. And while it sounds specific, I have had on numerous occasions that exact problem with a client talking about this I'm not sure how to put it, but this idea that a false solution that they have to a problem that or somehow they become tuned into this idea that fewer clicks is absolutely always better. We want as many links as possible so that a user can get anywhere they want to go on a site with as few clicks as possible, like 1 or 2 clicks, and that's max.
Right.
And a lot of clients do have some of these ideas in their head, things like the concept of the fold, what has to be above the fold. These are other ideas that I encounter a lot of clients who have come across these concepts and have interpreted them as law, and those conversations that we get to have trying to inform them that there are other ways to look at it. And actually, maybe these are not laws. Maybe they weren't even good ideas to begin with. In some cases, that can be tricky.
Yeah, I've definitely learned that the exception always proves the rule. It's, like fewer clicks, like, while yes, it's a good idea to have fewer clicks, it's not always the best idea. Or, having things above the fold or below the fold. Well, if I have to put a scroll down for more notification at the bottom of the screen because you have to have an image taking up the entire browser window, that's kind of a problem.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, but our messaging is above the fold. Like, well, yes, but that the messaging isn't telling anybody to do anything because you wouldn't trust us on what the messaging should be either.
Oh, it's fun. I'm sure we could do this all day. Just talk about the clients. And it sounds like you're very deep in the world that I live in. I get when I interact with our developers or other designers or our other people on the team, They don't always appreciate what you and I go through, convincing clients of these things or
Right.
Responding to their interesting requests at times.
Yes. Um, although we do have some clients where they know their users better than we do. So a lot of times I spend my time convincing the developer that doing something is a good idea because they know what people are going to be doing because they've been doing this for years. So it's just a matter of some days the battle's with the client, some days the battle's with the rest of the team.
How interesting is that? It
It
must
makes
feel
for
isolating at times.
um,
Like,
it can, but it also makes for kind of an interesting work environment because we'll go from butting heads and getting ready to strangle one another to in the next breath being able to chuckle about something else and just being all best friends again. We've learned we just can't take anything too personally. It's we don't have a problem with each other. We have a problem with the client, essentially.
how do you stay informed these days about what's the latest? What's the greatest and best trends and new findings and the lessons that other people on the web are finding that we can learn from?
um, Honestly, it just like all of us here, we tend to learn about more and more stuff just as needs arise. Anytime there's like a new problem, we get online and we search around and figure out what other people are doing. And through that, we end up actually learning some new and insightful like changes to our process. We're constantly evolving how we do things around here. Um, and a lot of times we actually come across things just by going through client sites or sites that clients have pointed out as like things that like having things that they like and don't like. So it's a constant state of discovery for us. And even me specifically, I tend to learn a lot about what's going on and what's new just by needing to find an answer to a question that's come up.
Right. So let's go back to this anthropology thing. Maybe before we dive
Sure.
into how it impacts your work, give us just like a little bit of an overview so we catch up. Anybody listening who maybe didn't study anthropology it quite so extensively, uh, which could be a big segment of our audience. I don't know. I'm just going out on a limb there. Give us just a glimpse at what anthropology was like in your academic endeavors.
Sure. Um, well, I know for a fact that not a lot of people tend to know what anthropology is, or they kind of have an idea, but it revolves around either Indiana Jones or digging up dinosaur bones, neither of which are actually anthropology. Um, so that's always fun. In My friends would often ask me, "So you run around fighting Nazis?" I'm like, well, no, I don't. No, I just study people. Um, so in a broad sense, anthropology it is the study of people, and it has everything. It covers everything from human history and prehistory all the way back to our most ancient human ancestor, all the way up to what are people going to be doing in 10 years. Um, we we tend to concentrate on culture and interactions between people, and some of us, especially me, we like to look into the interactions that people have with machines or using machines as a way to interact with one another. So kind of like my biggest draw to what I'm doing now happened when I was writing my master's thesis, and I was studying basically how companies use social media as a form of like communication and dialogue with their customer base. And I had done a case study of like Starbucks and Caribou Coffee and how they each used social media, specifically Twitter, as a way to communicate. And basically, it was kind of easy to see where Caribou ended up having to close down a bunch of stores because they just didn't have this business that Starbucks had. So so that ended up translating into like human computer interaction and into like how people use the internet, how people use websites, and the reasons behind their actions.
Fascinating. I studied psychology and sociology in college, but I never took an anthropology class. And it sounds like I really was missing out.
Oh, for sure.
So let's segue into where I wanted to go. Let's talk about how it affects your job
Mm-hmm.
today. This unique experience that you have, which not many designers, developers, agency, project managers, and UX um, experts that I've come across really have in their background. So how do you think that makes you uniquely suited for this project management slash UX role that you play?
Yeah, it definitely plays a lot in kind of my outlook on just daily life and like interacting with others. I'm more interested in kind of like listening to people and figuring out where they're coming from instead of trying to kind of figure out what like the best what the best solution is not necessarily always the right solution. So I'm more concerned with figuring out how best to solve the problem in each circumstance, because I've learned that every user is different, every client is different. So actually, like in my daily client interactions, I basically try to see what they're seeing from their point of view, and then take that back to the team and try to help explain to them like this is why they believe this is why they see this, and this is why they want this change. And it usually helps us all just kind of figure out like why people are trying to like change the design that we made, or they want different functionality than what we've developed. And it kind of also helps to diffuse tensions, just because I can show our team why the client wants something, but I can also go to the client and show them why the team made the decision that they made in order to build the website, create the product, etc. But at the same time, I'm also dealing with just like the user interface and the user experience side of things. So I also have to be kind of the user advocate. So I'm also fighting the client wants and needs with what the user actually wants and needs. So I also have to do a lot of research into who is supposed to be using the site versus who is actually using the site, and then trying to take those two groups and bring them together so that we have the right like ideal audience actually using the site, instead of there being a like client expectation of who they want using it versus who is actually finding their way to the site and using it. So I kind of fight my battles on multiple fronts.
I guess so. So I make a couple jokes about our audience and how I've not encountered other anthropology majors in my experience with web professionals. But I would defer to you. You tell me, is the web actually a direction that anthropology graduates are going? Is it unusual for someone studying anthropology to dive into the web, this new frontier with all kinds of users and people interacting in different ways? Are your old anthropology buddies going into this field, or are you doing something kind of special and unique?
In my personal sphere, I'm doing something quite unique. Everybody I went to school with essentially went on to get a PhD, and they study heavily like theoretical concepts, and they do more traditional field work, going into the field for years and studying a group of people. But I actually feel kind of lucky in that where I got my master's from, Wayne State in Detroit, they actually concentrated a lot on like practicing anthropology. And the difference between like traditional anthropology and practicing is that in practicing, we go out to the field and we have the goal of solving problems rather than building a knowledge base in order to better understand the world from. And even though we're not necessarily acting on building that knowledge base, we do contribute quite a bit in the practicing end of the field. But yeah, it is quite unique from my personal standpoint, But I have come across a handful of anthropologists, and when I say handful, I can literally count on one hand the number of anthropologists that do any sort of like web work that I've encountered. Yeah, we're pretty few and far between. A lot of times, for a lot of the work that I do, a lot of the people come from a more like design-oriented background.
Hmm. Fascinating. Yeah, and that's been my experience as well. I was just curious what your take is, knowing other professionals with the same
Mm-hmm.
academic background. So one thing, what I'd really like to dive into, if we could like dissect this and go a little bit deep so I could better understand when you get something from a client and you look at it, I want to understand like what you see and what you're looking for. And in just if we were to illustrate in a goofy way, think about like the shows that we've seen like Russell Crowe in A Beautiful Mind or Psych or Sherlock
Mm-hmm.
Holmes or something like that, where these characters look at something that everyone else sees, but see different things. Look at something. And so visually in the movie, you see Sherlock Holmes noticing clues and things that no one else perceives. And so in that way, you as a UX professional, especially with this interesting anthropology background, when you get maybe a mock from a designer or a concept or outline from a client and it's put in front of you, what do you see that other people don't see? What are the things that you look for? Walk us through that process where you're assessing something for the first time.
Okay. Actually, part of the assessment actually just comes from our initial kickoff meeting, where part of the meeting revolves around us kind of feeling out and asking the client what they need. Like, what are you looking for? And um, even though my role is supposed to be to kind of be the liaison between the client and our team, and also kind of like understand who we're supposed to be designing it for, I usually like to sit back and let other people do the talking, because generally I get more information just out of hearing what people are saying and kind of picking that apart. I tend to like read between the lines of what people have said. They might say that they need a like a clean and modern interface, and what that means is they just want something that's easy to use. But they get so wrapped up in using like the buzzwords of the industry that they kind of they lose sight of like what they actually need or what they're actually trying to ask for. And another thing that we like to do is kind of figure out who the client perceives as their ideal user or their ideal audience. And then from there, um, I'll generally kind of dive into some research just to figure out like who makes up that audience. If they say like, oh, we want to talk to businesses that are in the 50 to 100 employee range, and our industry is IT. It's like, well, who are they actually supposed to be talking to within these companies? And then trying to figure out like who fits that role, who are those people, and then taking that and then using that as a way to like better understand what we should be building the website to, or building the tool to. And from an internal perspective, usually what happens is I'll see like a wireframe initially and kind of be able to um, say like, okay, like this layout isn't going to work in this circumstance, or maybe we should add another element here. But it's not actually until we get to the initial development stage where we're building out the site that I can have a lot of impact, because as far as like a mock design goes, it it looks good and fits the initial wireframe. So it's kind of hard to necessarily like see the actions taking place there. Um, Although I do tend to do a better job than some of the clients do at looking at the mocks and figuring out what's actually going on here, because I can also kind of sit down with our designer and hash out what we're trying to do, what we're trying to push people, and try and head off some of those issues later on. But usually once we get to the design phase, we can start playing around with things, and we'll have an initial round of just UI discussions. So just me, the developer, and the designer will kind of sit around the development site and play with things, and we'll talk about, this needs to be moved here. Here's where we have to push the user in this direction. But a lot of that just kind of comes from the initial understanding who the site user is actually supposed to be and how they would normally interact with the site. I also tend to do a lot of reading on studies of people using different technologies, and I have to kind of read more and more things as the years go on, because there are new studies, and the 50 somethings from 10 years ago are no longer the 50 somethings of today. So it's a constant uphill battle of figuring out who has what technological knowledge, who's used what kind of technology, who's used to, a smartphone versus a clamshell. And I'm never done learning is part of it. And so I'm just constantly learning who people are and what the extent of their knowledge is.
You raise a good point, and it makes me think that if some client of mine from even 5 years ago were to come to me today and get advice about their project, it would, and if for some reason they had a fantastic memory, they could very likely say, last night, what you told me last time we talked 5 years ago, you're giving me totally different advice now, or you may even be completely contradicting yourself on this topic. And that's perfectly likely, or I would say highly probable. Would you agree that maybe that is the case for you, that so many things change, so many lessons that you have learned, the industry has evolved, your knowledge of the web and users has evolved, and you would be giving totally different advice than you were 5, 6, 7 years ago now? And if you could, what might some examples of that be?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Just as we learn new things, as the technology changes, we're able to, create new, better tools. We're able to do things that we weren't able to do even a year ago. Let's see. We have a client who we've been working with for 4 or 5 years now, and we've gone through 3 different iterations of their website at this point. And each time, it's not necessarily that we were wrong in any way. It's just that we were kind of constrained by the technology of the time. And so every time we come around, every couple of years, like, okay, we want to redo the website. We want to be able to do more things with it. And it's always interesting to see just where they want to draw the line. Because, like I said, we didn't do anything wrong initially. It's just that we couldn't do the things that we can do now, or we see new ways of doing the things that we did before that work better. But it's always kind of interesting in that the client never kind of like brings up that, like, oh, well, this isn't what you told us before. Often, like, they're really good about like knowing that, like, well, now that we have the capability of doing this new thing, we can totally rework the way that you do everything on your site, and it'll work faster, it'll work better. But oftentimes they, instead of doing kind of like a new project where we kind of tear down an existing structure and build a new or better one, they'll also opt to just kind of keep hobbling together the old one because it works well enough. And sometimes it's just easier to say, like, okay, yes, we can just do this because it's not the end of the world now. Instead of telling them, like, oh no, this is an entirely new website. I know we just built one last year, but with what you're trying to do now, it's an entirely new website that we have to build you. That'll be a whole new project.
So what do you think is on the in the future for you professionally, your role at Build Create and where Build Create is going? What do you see on the horizon? Doing more of anything in particular, growing in any particular areas, challenging yourself in new ways?
As far as the future goes, we've been doing a lot more like essentially product and tool development than actual like website development. And as far as websites go, I think that is the future, because it's easy enough for anybody who doesn't necessarily have a big budget to find somebody to help them build like a Squarespace site, or to put together a simple like WordPress template on a server for them. And it for like a marketing or an informational site, that's generally more than enough for a lot of people. But where we're seeing the big differentiation is companies and individuals looking for tools and looking for a way to help them get their job done, or to help them complete a task. And that seems to be where Build Create is going as a company. And for me, it's the most exciting thing, because that's my favorite thing to do, is to solve the problem. Those projects don't tend to be as like mock design based. Like, okay, like we're going to build a website that looks like this, is no longer the project. The project is now, hey, I have this problem and I need you to solve it. And so we can sit down and put our heads together and come up with a like creative, innovative, and beautiful way of solving the problem. And that's what excites me the most about the future, is being able to like look forward and see that we're no longer just putting information on the web. We're building tools that help people in their everyday lives. And it's just fascinating to me just how much we've been able to do, especially on a platform like WordPress that wasn't possible a year or two ago, just because the platform and the technology has gotten so good. So like that's kind of where I see things going. And that's also the challenge for me, is just continuing to be able to anticipate what people are going to need, and being able to read the people well enough to basically give them the best product I can. And all at the same time, with the generations of people shifting and changing constantly.
Sweet. So you're really excited, with good reason.
Oh,
That sounds
oh
like a
yeah.
very exciting path, and the future is bright. A lot of cool things happening. Do you ever, though, at times, get a little nostalgic about the past, a different time, the good old days when the web was a simpler place?
I have a soft spot in my heart for like the mid 90s web, where it's just gradients and patterns and spinning GIFs and you name it, the marquee scrolling across the screen. I have a soft spot for that.
Every now and then you come across one of those sites, and it just, at this point, it really does kind of warm your heart. Like, it survived. It's still here
Yeah,
somehow.
definitely.
Yeah. Different times, and things change fast. So give us a
Oh yeah.
glimpse, if you could. I'd love to have a little bit of a preview of your session for Saturday. Tell us a little bit about what you're going to talk about.
Well, I can't remember the title off the top of my head, so that's it's kind of long, but basically my presentation is going to be just a quick look at why a user-oriented
It's a behavior-oriented
design.
approach to design and function.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so looking at kind of like user behavior and why it's necessary at this point in time to take that into account. Like we can't any longer design something and then say, okay, well, yep, people can use it. It's great. Now, because users have so many options, the web is such a big place. We now have to take their we have to take their behavior into account, so that they not only have a useful website, but one that they can use. It's no longer good enough to just be able to perform the function. It has to be easy to perform that function.
Fascinating. That sounds like a really great talk. It starts promptly at 11:05 a.m. on Saturday, October 15th at the University of Michigan. So if anybody's tuning in and is trying to decide which session to go to, I recommend Alex's. All right. So we've got our time flying by here. I've just got a few kind of wrap-up questions I want to hit you with, if that's all right.
Yep.
All right. So do you have a favorite WordPress plugin?
Favorite WordPress plugin? I use so many all the time. I absolutely love Gravity Forms, just because it's such a useful plugin. Like, yes, it does forms, but we use it for buying tickets. We use it for doing just amazingly convoluted things. Signing up for memberships with 1 million different levels and 35 different options. Right. It's just one of those plugins that we can't seem to find a way to like break or not be able to use it. It always fits, and we can always figure out how to make it do what we need it to do.
What sort of things do you do with your spare time, Alex?
Right now, I've been spending a lot of time in the garage. I've been restoring a 1985 Pontiac Fiero, wow. And it's currently in pieces all over the place. It will be interesting to see how long it takes me to put it back together, but that's what I've been doing lately.
Do you have an estimate? How long does that sort of thing take?
Well, if I could do it all day, every day, I could probably do the whole thing in 2 months. But since it's kind of nights and weekends, I'm looking at being done with it sometime in the mid to late spring of next year.
All right. That's a pretty cool project. What are you going to do with a car like that?
I'd like to do some autocross or rallycross with it. I've done some of that in the past, but I'm purpose building a car for it is fun.
That sounds like a really good time. Pretty cool. All right, so let's see. Let's take a look at your calendar. For anybody who was interested in kind of bumping into you in person and chatting somewhere, are there any kinds of events or public outings where someone might bump into Alex Beaudin on the calendar?
Well, I'm easy to find every summer at the Ypsilanti Summer Beer Festival. Otherwise, though, you can often find me at like Corner Brewery in Ypsilanti or just any of the random events going on in downtown. I have a lot of friends in the community, so we're constantly going to different events, art showings, things like that.
Fantastic. Do you have any good suggestions for future guests that I might invite on the show?
I would say our developer here, Joe, he would be fascinating, but I don't know if you'd be able to pin him down to actually have a conversation with him. He's a man of few words. But otherwise, we have a copywriter that we work with, Laura Lynch, and she does some fantastic blogging for us. She does a bunch of blogging herself and is a really good both copywriter and creative writer. So she's a very interesting person to talk to. She's also, she did a lot of schooling overseas and spent plenty of time in Russia. So she's always got some interesting experiences she can talk about.
I met Laura recently. We talked at a Ann Arbor meetup a couple weeks ago.
Cool.
Yeah. All right. So we're pretty much wrapping up, getting down to the end here. So before we go, Alex, is there anything really that you want to share? And I usually look for things like anything you'd like to plug or promote, or anything you'd like to recommend people look into as passing words of wisdom, or really anything that any ways to get in touch with you that you would like people to know about if they are so inclined?
Just as a word of wisdom, I've found that clients and users can break websites in the most fascinating ways, and it really helps to just outline where, on the development side, we tend to overlook things or get used to just or take for granted the way things work. Also, I've found that users tend to be right in the wrong ways. Often they want to do things or decide that the website should do something that it has never been designed to do. And that kind of helps us understand where we may have gone wrong, or another way of seeing how things may have been overlooked in the development process. But if anybody wants to get a hold of me, they can tweet me at Alex Beaudin on Twitter. And that's probably the easiest way to get a hold of me, really.
Fantastic. I've got to get you in our Slack group one of these days too. All right.
Sounds good.
So it's been a great chat. Learned a lot about you, Alex, and some great insight on user experience, anthropology, client interactions. Fantastic stuff. I love these kind of discussions, and I could do it all night, but I've got a dinner to get to with my wife. So here we go. Fun. I think I'm going to let you go, and we're going to catch up this weekend.
Yeah. You have a good evening, and I'll see you this weekend.
Thanks a lot for your time, Alex. Talk soon.
Thanks for having me.